everyone. Welcome. We are so happy that you're here. I'm Jess. I am on the marketing team at All Points North. It's an honor to bring you the APN Virtual Speaker Series. This is a free initiative to bring mental health and recovery resources to all people at no charge to you. So All Points North is a mind-body health company that believes that mental health is a critical part of total health, not an accessory to it. Before we get started, I'd like to give a special welcome to our residential PhD clients at Helplessness Lodge in Edwards, Colorado, our virtual therapy clients all over the country, our APN alumni, and all the families of clients and alumni, and all of you who are brand new to the speaker series. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy to have you here. A few notes before we get started. After the event, we'll have a Q&A session with Kevin and our marketing director, Brianna. We love your participation, so please drop your questions in that Q&A box as Kevin is speaking. Also, please feel free to drop your thoughts or questions in the chat. You just want to be sure to change your screen name in Zoom if you'd like to remain anonymous. Otherwise, your name will pop up for everyone along with the message. So, now I'm pleased to introduce Kevin Petersen, MA, LMFT, is the founder of the Codependency Institute, which provides healing for families in crisis due to addiction and codependency, as well as family addiction coaching training for clinicians. Kevin began his journey of recovery in May 1991 and has been sober ever since. After graduating with a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, Kevin worked as an in-home therapist, a case manager, a crisis evaluator, and an outpatient therapist, as well as a mental health technician and counselor at an acute treatment unit. In 2014, he opened his private practice, Petersen Family Counseling, which specializes in working with families and individuals struggling with addictions, codependency, and parenting. Kevin has published 2 books, Chronic Hope, Parenting the Addicted Child, and Chronic Hope, Families and Addiction. Both books share an integrated holistic approach to healing families in crisis due to addiction and codependency. Kevin established the Chronic Hope Institute in 2020 to help families in crisis and train mental health professionals on family addiction. So thank you all again so much for being here. Let's get started. Welcome, Kevin. Now it's your turn.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Jess. Hey, everybody. Thanks for spending your Monday afternoon or evening, as the case may be, with me or with us. And I am going to pop up a slide here. And bear with me as my technical skills can be a little challenging sometimes. Okay. I'm going to sort of roll through this and there it goes. Look at that. Okay. I feel like I'm in business now. And happy to answer questions. Happy to answer personal questions, professional questions, whatever works. I try to be as open of this book as humanly possible. So my name's Kevin Petersen. I have a master's, obviously, in marriage and family therapy, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Colorado and in the state of Florida, which is actually where I reside right now. I live in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. My education, my professional education, which I always think is important to sort of share with people, is that I went to Regis. I graduated with a master's in marriage and family therapy in 2011. And I also stuck around and got a certificate in child and adolescent counseling, which literally taught me that I don't like working with kids. I love kids and I love being with kids and adolescents and teens. I just have I'm not a good therapist for them. And then I went to the University of Southern California. I got a degree in economics. I started in 1982 and I graduated in 1994. And that's a long story. And we'll talk about that probably through this process. And like we talked about earlier, I started Petersen Family Counseling in 2014. I started the Family Recovery Program in 2015. It was a 2-day program that I sold into 4 different treatment centers. The Chronic Hope Institute in 2020, because it's really important for me to be able to offer as much information as humanly possible for free and train people and help people. Then I worked at Arapahoe Douglas Mental Health. And then I worked at a place called Reflections for Youth while I was in graduate school. I got sober on May 5th, 1991. I'm coming up on 31 years. I still am a very active member of the 12-step community. I started going to Al-Anon in December of 2009. And then I started going to Adult Children of Alcoholics in May of 2017. And that has been defining for me as well. I just think it's important so that you know who I am and where I'm coming from. All right, let's keep rolling here. I grew up in a house of addiction. And by that, what I mean is my mother was a prescription drug addict. We had a house of chaos, crisis, drama, and confusion on the inside. On the outside, I grew up in Palo Alto, California, and my dad was very successful and did very well. We had all the accoutrements of sort of what you would think is a very well-off life on the outside. And we worked very, 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 very hard on presenting that image out and not, but on the inside, it was just chaos. It was insane. My mom had migraines almost every day. And my sister and I were taught at an early age to cover for her, to take care of her, to solve problems, to lie to people on the phone. And that was just an inherent way of how I was raised. Started using drugs and alcohol when I was 13 in the Boy Scouts of America. And then I started, like I said, I started at USC in 1982, and I faked my graduation from there in 1988. I had been going to college for 6 years. I hadn't actually been going for 6 years, but I was living down there, and my parents kind of got tired of the whole situation. So they circled the wagons in the fall of 1990 and said, "What's the story? You said you graduated." We went to a ceremony, and we don't see a diploma, we don't see anything. And it kind of called me out, and that's what got me sober. And so I started going, like I said, to recovery in May of 1991. I actually went back to USC and graduated in 1994. And then I graduated from Regis in 2011. All right, so let's talk about the stages that families go through that when they have someone who's in active addiction in their home. And the first process is what I call the triage phase. And what that really means is my typical first phone call is that I get the family's in crisis. And what we're looking to do, what we want to create for them is a plan of action. And they want to tell me the story about their loved one, whether it's their child, their adult child, their teenage child, their spouse, their parent, their brother, their sister, their coworker. They want to spend a lot of time explaining things and help and sharing with me and telling me everything. And I that's really important to me. I want them to talk as much as humanly possible and tell me as much as humanly possible, because in the way they're telling the story, they also tell me about the family dynamic, which is just super critical, because I can definitely, help them get them to a space where they're, we can come up with a plan, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here, about what that plan looks like. But I want to assess the family as well, not just the individual. So, then I always ask them to make an appointment. I always tell people, don't try to fix everything in one shot, and we go from there. So when I'm working with these families, one of the things I always tell people that there are three kinds of people when it comes to drugs and alcohol. And it helps them define what they're dealing with and helps them understand. The first one is what we call a social user, and they can take it or leave it. They can have one drink or get a little bit high, and then they can stop or moderate. And it's when they start to feel a little goofy, or they know that they have something important to do tomorrow, or maybe they have to drive, or they have to get back to the kids, or get back to the house, or back to work, and they can have a beer, a glass of wine, and just be like, "I'm good," and that's it. I'm going to stop. And when that's amazing to me. I was never able to do that. I never understood that. I never understood the reasoning behind it. Then we have what we call the hard users. And hard users can look a lot like alcoholics and addicts, but given a sufficient reason, whether it's at home or at work or the legal system, they can stop or moderate. Someone can sit them down and say, "Hey, you're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your family. The world's going to really come crashing down on you, and you need to pull back dramatically, and you need to stop, and you need to completely disengage from this environment that or you're going to have huge consequences." And generally, what we looked at with hard users is they are capable of doing that. They may have to try a couple of times, but they can, on their own, they can pull it back and get it back together. But now let's talk about the addict and the alcoholic. They cannot regulate or stop on their own, no matter what the consequences. And the thing there is that the addicts and the alcoholics will tell you they're going to do everything in their power to stop. They're going to try. They're going to do everything they can to knock it off. They just can't get there. They just can't. And they mean it. I mean, I told my family and my friends and my girlfriends and my jobs repeatedly, oh no, I'm going to clean up. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to go to therapy. I'm going to fly, straighten up and fly right. And I meant it. I just couldn't do it. So let's talk about what addiction means and the sort of the classification and definition. I look at it as, you know, the three parts of addiction is the first part is what we call the physical. And what that means is once they start, they cannot stop or control it. They don't have that filter. They don't have that ability to physically stop. And it's the first drink that starts the addiction, not the last, you know? And what I tell people is it's like getting hit by a train. When you get hit by a train, it's not the caboose that kills you. It's the engine, right? It's that first one. It's that first engagement into the drugs and the alcohol. That's the problem. The problem isn't the 5th, 10th, or 25th. It's the first. And we also call that the phenomenon of craving. And we also call it a physical allergy. Because once the drink or the drug is in the body is like, I want more now. The next part of what we call this is the mental obsession. And the mental obsession comes from this perspective of this time it's going to be different. And the problem isn't the alcohol or the drugs, it's the people, the places, the situation. It's always, you know, there's always a reason, there's a story, there's an excuse. This time I'm going to totally get it together. Oh, don't you worry, I've got it all figured out. I got a plan. And it just never works. It just never works. And then the last piece is what we call the spiritual or spiritual malady. And that is that the addict is not willing to accept or admit defeat. You know, they're not willing to accept any help, and they're not willing to try anything that's out of their box or out of their thinking. And really what we're looking at here is that the addict's ego is taking over and saying, you don't need help. You can handle this. You can solve this problem. You don't need to go to therapy. You don't need to go to treatment. You don't need to go to a 12-step program or any kind of community support program. You don't need that. You'll get this all by yourself. And the sad part is they'll say that all the way up to the point where they're almost dead. So the next thing I like to do is take a full family history. I want to make sure I've talked to the parents, talked to the siblings. When did this start? You know, get the full history, find out what the history of mental health and addiction are in the family system. A lot of times families will very quickly say, there's no history whatsoever of addiction or mental health in our family whatsoever other than this person. And I used to kind of like argue with them and want to go down that path with them. And now I'm just like, okay, I get it. And I think that's indicative of our society, where we have created this stigma and this shame around mental health and addiction. And so we don't want to acknowledge that there are people in our family system that struggled or start struggling or needed help, or we've heard the stories about somebody from way back when. And that's a big piece of my mission, is getting to that point where it's okay to talk about this stuff. It's not a deep, dark secret. And the funny thing is, your neighbors are dealing with it too. Your best friend, your coworkers, they're all fighting the same battle. So, you know, more questions. Who have you talked to about your loved one? Have you tried therapy? Have you tried the leadership of your faith-based community? Have you tried talking to the individual? Have you played out all your cards? Are you ready to try something a little bit different? Is kind of the questions that we're looking for. Get the timeline, when, you know, that sort of thing. What I have come up with in my professional world and the engagement of the families that I've been working with is what I call Plan A. And in Plan A, what we're going to do is create an environment where we are going to establish three things: boundaries, accountability, and structure. And we're going to create it in three areas. We're going to create it in drugs and alcohol, school and work, and behavior within the structure of the family. And this is, you got to remember that when the families come to me, they've tried everything else. They're at the point where they're afraid that something really drastic and really awful is going to happen, and they really want some help at this point. So my thing is, I think it's critical that you start setting boundaries, but boundaries are only as valid as the accountability function behind them. Because every family I work with will tell me the exact same thing. Well, we tried setting boundaries and he just blew right through them. I'm like, okay, well, what did you do then? And they're like, what do you mean? And I said, well, when he violated the boundary, what was the consequence? What was the accountability? How did you tell me what the process was? And they're like, well, we just said no more drugs and no more drinking. And they did anyway. And then we just didn't know what to do. So that's where this plan comes from. So boundaries are not about you. Boundaries are about you. They're not about the addict or the alcoholic or the person struggling with mental health. They're about what you're willing. You have to be willing to set them and hold them. And you have to remember, it's not a negotiation. And it's about you holding your line and holding your integrity. Accountability is how you're going to hold the boundary. What's the system of accountability you're going to use? How is this going to be defined? You can't just say, I need you to give me more respect. That's too generic and too open. It has to be much more delineated and much more clear and somewhere measurable so we can talk about it. And then, the final piece of plan A is what we call structure. And structure is a consequence or reward for following the boundary and achieving the accountability. So let's talk about what this actually looks like. Okay, so the boundary is no drugs or no alcohol. And then the accountability behind that is we're going to do regular drug testing at a drug facility. And we're going to probably use like a sober link or a breathalyzer or something along those lines, where we're measuring this on a regular basis. And then the reward or consequence, depending on the age of the person, it can be visitation to the kids, access to the kids if it's an adult. It can be, living outside the home. If it's someone who's under 18 or someone who's in college, it can be, hey, we're not going to fund your situation. We're not going to give you money to go to college. We're not going to pay your rent. We're not going to pay your bills. We're not going to do those things until you get this under control. However, we will always offer them a solution. We're never just going to throw somebody into a penalty box and not say, and we're willing to give you help. And we'll talk about that in a second. So the next boundary is work or school. So if it's someone who's still living under your roof, or even though they're high school or college or even past that, we're going to talk about what that's going to look like. And so what we're going to say is, you got to go to school, you got to go to work, you got to do some combination of the two. If you're going to live at home, you got to help pay the bills, you got to help pay for the rent, you got to help pay for the food, or you got to go to school part-time or full-time, which again, if we can help you, we'll help you. But we want to see regular paychecks, and we want and help around the house financially. And we're going to define that specifically. And we also want to see your grades. And when I say grades, what I really mean is, we want transparency with the system that you're going to school with, whether it's an online portal. We're going to take a look at your attendance. We're going to take a look at whether or not you're turning in your work, and we're going to take a look at what your final grades are, what your running grades are. Most systems today, high schools or colleges, have the ability to see this stuff on a real-time basis. So that's the accountability function. And then the last piece is, the reward or consequences. Again, if you're not going to participate in these things, then, if you're not going to go to work, or not going to go to school, or some combination of the two, that's cool. We'll respect your choice, but you're not living here and we're not funding it. So you better go get a job, you better go find a place to live, you better get on your own 2 feet. And then the last piece is the household duties and acceptable behaviors. We're going to call that, behavior within the structure of the family. What we're going to do is have a weekly family meeting, and we're going to review. I always tell people to pick the top 5 things, like, clean up around the house. There's a curfew, no yelling, no hitting, no swearing, just basic stuff, and make it real clear and concise so that people can understand where you're coming from and why. And then I always think it's important to have a weekly family meeting where all of this stuff is reviewed. Let's take a look at the drug test. I don't think you should be checking their grades and everything every day. I think you should do it once a week together as a family. Let's say, hey, let's log in and see where we're at, because that's going to determine what's going to happen. And then the reward and consequence is access to the internet, phone, car, et cetera, et cetera. The benefits of being a member of the family, basically. So it's all about accountability and transparency. And the other big piece of that is consistency, is, you know, getting the family on board to understanding that they're going to participate in this process as well. So getting started, you got to work with a family case manager to set the boundaries, make them realistic, lead by example. Never ask your loved one to do something that you're not willing to do. And that's just critical, because, you know, isolating somebody and putting them in treatment, and for whatever the reason, you know, and acting as if they're the only one that has a problem, is a bit naive, and it doesn't solve, it doesn't heal the system, you know, because you're still going to bring that person back into the family, and hopefully we got to alter and change the family system as well to help that person and help the family heal. Make sure that the whole family is on board with plan A. If not, we got to have a meeting and talk about what's going on and why and where we're at. And, you know, it can't be fragmented, you know, because what we're talking about is implementing some boundaries that hopefully will help this person and get back on track and get to where they need to be. If your family member is abusing alcohol or marijuana, I always say, give them a 30-day window, try it for 30 days, see what happens, work together, do a weekly meeting. Everybody's on the same team. Everyone's in the same gang. You know, let's see how it goes. If someone's dealing with hard drugs like cocaine, meth, opiates, benzos, fentanyl now, give them, I would say, I would just tell them up front, hey, we love you, but this is not okay. And we're going to give you a week to get it together. But the problem is that they could literally die. And I mean, I work with a lot of families that have had to use Narcan or have overdoses, have gone to the ER. And so I don't want to be the Grim Reaper, and I don't want to be the scary guy. But I don't want, you know, the next thing to do is to be planning a funeral. I am much more interested in helping the family set up some boundaries and set up some structure so that we can help this person and offer them a solution. Don't argue with them. Remember, if you're trying to set boundaries to protect the family, it's not a negotiation. Don't argue. Then another thing I get back is, if we do what you're suggesting, he'll get mad at me, he'll get high, he'll kill himself, he'll go out on the streets. And here's the thing. If somebody's actively using to the level where you think you need to look into, you know, helping them, they're already killing themselves. We have to accept and understand that they're already killing themselves, and it's time for some action. So why not take an action and offer them a solution, as opposed to just standing back and watching them kill themselves? All right. Couple of big rules. Don't be shaming, angry, or punitive. It never works. Come at it from a place of love. When my parents approached me in 1990, my dad and I drove home from a family reunion. We had a 4-hour drive, and the first 5 minutes went like this: Kevin, you're my only son and I love you, but I don't believe a word out of your mouth. Your sister and your mother and I got together, and we think you need help. And you know, we want you to get help, and we'll help you get the help. But if you choose not to get the help, we're going to choose to keep you at an arm's length distance and not engage as part of the family. And so they offered me a solution, they held their boundary, and they kept it. So now we've tried plan B, let's say, for someone, you know, who's drinking or smoking pot, or we figured out that they're doing more than that through the drug testing. So now we got to talk about plan B. And plan B is a little bit more drastic. It's taking a look at intervention and treatment. And we're going to do this with love and compassion, not anger and frustration, not shame, not being punitive, not being punishing. You're not doing any, remember, you're not doing them any favors by tolerating or ignoring their behavior or acting as if it's not happening. You know, where the name Chronic Hope came from was a good friend of mine, Josh Miller, said, when I was writing my first book, he's like, well, what's it about? I said, well, it's about these families that I work with who I love and adore, but they all universally have the same belief system. They really do believe that tomorrow, magically, their loved one is going to wake up and be like, oh my God, what am I doing? I've got to stop. And they're going to change everything all by themselves. And he's like, so would it be fair to say they kind of have like a chronic hope that things are magically going to get better? I'm like, that's it. That's the name, Chronic Hope. So that's the thing I try to impress upon these families, is that, hey, if we just stand back on the sidelines, we're going to end up burying this person. So let's step into it and let's actually offer them a solution. Allowing someone to live in your house and still use is enabling them to kill themselves under your own roof. And you don't want to do that. So when we take a look at treatment, when we talk about drug and alcohol treatment, what are we looking at? What we're talking about, the continuum of care, is the first part is what we talk about going into a medical detox facility, which is it's like being in a hospital. It literally is being in a hospital style of environment. Generally, you're there from 3 to 7, maybe 10 days, getting all the initial toxicity out of your system. And so you're at least coherent enough to be able to go to the next level. And that next level is the residential treatment center, which most of you are familiar with, just treatment. That's what APN is. And that can be anywhere traditionally from 14 to 28 days. The next step after that is what we call partial hospitalization program. And that goes from 6 to 12 weeks, depending on the family system, depending on what's being offered. And a lot of times this can be very driven by insurance as well. And then partial hospitalization is about 20 hours a week of programming. So we've gone from a hospital setting to a full-time engagement at RTC. And now as you can see, as we go down through the spectrum, we start to lower the level of care and start to increase the person's freedoms and allow them to kind of get back in action and go back to work, become part of the family again, et cetera, et cetera. And we're testing it. We're never just going to throw them back into the wild and be like, good luck, because that just doesn't work. What we want to do is sort of let them out and then have them be able to come back on a regular basis, and then let them out a little bit longer and then have them come back on a regular basis. And we can sort of test it and see, because if they end up stubbing their toe or getting into difficult situations or having a hard time, they have a massive support system around them. And we want them to be able to learn how to access that system instead of relying on themselves and falling back into a relapse. The next level down is what we call intensive outpatient, which goes again for about 6 to 12 weeks. And that is about 9 to 12 hours. It's generally done during the evenings or maybe the weekends. That's the kind of thing where people can go back into their homes, go back into their jobs, go back into school, but they're going to come back and do like 3 nights a week or 4 nights a week for 3 or 4 hours. It's going to be therapy. It's going to be group therapy. It's going to be activities. It's going to be experiential works, all that sort of stuff. Then the last piece that we generally look at in the continuum of care is what we call sober living. And in sober living, a lot of times PHP and IOP will be done as you live in a sober living. And I like to see, in a perfect world, I would like to see people in a continuum of care for a year. And there's 2 reasons why. It takes a long time to break the alcoholic and drug addict habits. And it takes a long time to get them to learn how to reach out and ask for help on a regular basis. And physically, it takes about a year to 18 months for the brain to get rewired and get all the synapses back together and working up together. Couple of key points when it comes to picking a treatment center. We don't let the addict pick or select where they want to go for treatment. They're always going to kind of try to find a way to make it work to their advantage. So this is something that we're going to engage with an interventionist, and we're going to pick a treatment center based upon a lot of different functions, and we'll get there in a second. The family therapist, case manager, interventionist may be the best resources for helping you choose a treatment option. Don't be afraid to ask to speak with other families that have been through the process before you. Most places like APN will say, hey, yeah, we have some people you can talk to, and sure, we'd be happy to answer all your questions. And we welcome the fact that families have lots of questions. Do your research is one of the most important things I always tell families. And just, don't be shy. A lot of times, if someone's under 18, families will work with an educational consultant, an interventionist, or a family case manager in the process of picking a treatment. I tell people if they can get away, if they have time available for it, try visiting some of the programs. I always also believe planning on 90 days to 6 months of treatment at a minimum. The longer they can stay in the continuum of care, the better their chances are for success. About 75 to 80% of addicts end up going to 30-day programs only without any sort of follow-up care, and then they immediately start cycling back through and relapsing. So that's when you start hearing those people say, well, treatment doesn't work. Well, I don't agree with that. Treatment does work because they were sober while they were in treatment, but when they came back, they didn't follow through. So I had both my knees replaced in 2016. And one of the things that my surgeon, my physical therapist, and the PA and everybody there impressed upon me over and over and over and over, you have to go to the rehab. You have to go, you have to continue to go and go and go and go. Otherwise, your knees are going to lock up and you're not going to have any ability to move. And they were right, because I got lazy. And so one of the things I always tell people is it's just like going to the gym. You can't just go a couple of times and think you're all better. You actually got to make this a new part of your life. Oh, no lunch break. I got it. So how do you pick an interventionist? So one of the things I always say is ask for word of mouth referrals for an interventionist from professionals in the recovery community. Could be your family therapist, could be somebody you know in your church or faith-based community, could be your doctor might know somebody. Ask your friends. Trust me, you're not the only one dealing with this. Understand that you get what you pay for. The average fee for a skilled interventionist is about $5,000, could be plus or minus that. And then there's travel engaged in that as well. What I always tell families is call the interventionist. It's free to make the phone call and ask them how they work, what's their system, and what's the process. And they will walk you through the entire concept of what they do and how they do it. And I always try to give families a couple of different referrals so they have a couple of different people to talk to. And I think that's just critical. And a lot of times, some of the best interventionists often work in teams. And we'll bring a couple of people with them. So the next thing is to take stock about what's going on, if there's any special considerations for your loved one. And do I need to stop, Anna, or someone?
Nope. Keep on going.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I heard a doorbell. Okay. So the next step is to take stock of what's going on. If the addict is female and has a history of trauma, for example, I prefer to use facilities that are maybe gender specific, that are super trauma informed, because you don't want to be re-traumatizing. When you take someone into treatment and remove all the drugs and the alcohol that they're using to numb themselves, they're going to start to get all very emotional and have lots of feelings and become very, hypersensitive. So we want to find a place that engages with that and understands that, another consideration is that, in state or out of state. And obviously I'm a big fan of removing someone from their environment and putting them into a place where people can't come get them, and like they can't walk out the door and have one of their buddies come get them and pick them up, where they actually have to dig in and focus. We've also, gender specific is very critical. How trauma informed are they? One of the neat things about APN, right, is that they're super mental health oriented. So we got to evaluate and understand, where is this person on the spectrum of their mental health issue as opposed to their addiction. A lot of times the families that I work with are like, well, I'm not sure how deep the addiction is, but he certainly has mental health issues and we're not sure how to sort that out. And here's my position. I totally understand. It makes perfect sense. But the first thing we have to address and understand is that we're not going to get anywhere with the mental health issues if they're actively using. So let's get to a space where we can remove the drugs and the alcohol, and then we can really dig in and figure out what's going on with the mental health issues and where they come from and why. Obviously after the 30 days, this is the continuum of care. These are all the things we talked about earlier. One of the other things that I think is super critical to understand as well is understanding the individual family's needs financially and where they're at. Not everybody can write big checks. So sometimes what's going to determine is what's in network for them and their insurance plan. So it's about learning how to, you can't, one of the things that I see people in my industry do is kind of bully families into spending money that they just don't have. And I don't think that's fair. I think it's really despicable. And so what I always try to do is offer them, I'll say, look, these are the places that are in network. They're great places. They offer a fantastic gig. If you're interested, here are some places that are out of network. It's going to cost more, but they may have some things that might be more appealing to you. But the other ones are they're okay. There's nothing wrong with them. So I think it's just critical. If the family has resources, I'm always a fan of 90-day inpatient models. They actually combine inpatient PHP and IOP all in that 90-day engagement. The longer we keep them engaged in treatment, the better the success we have. The statistics are just real clear and concise. While the person's in treatment, we look to, one of the most important things for me when I recommend someone to treatment is that there are weekly meetings where the family is engaged back with me, discussing their feelings, asking questions. I don't understand what's going on. Tell me what this is. They're calling me talking about this. The treatment center is talking about this. The therapist said that. And I just love answering all those questions. And, I always tell the family, look, your loved one's in treatment, and my job is to help you sort of do your own in-home treatment process while they're away. I always want them to seek family support groups and resources. And I think it's critical for me. My job is to help them understand and assess the family dynamic. One of the things I always tell people, this analogy that I like to use is, when a company is struggling, you address the management team first and then the employees, not the other way around. So when you have a family that's got somebody who's struggling with addiction or mental health issues, and it's tearing the family apart, yes, we want to get that person help, but we also want to come back into the family, and we want to start with the top down and help the family rearrange the way they're doing business, because that person is a function of the family system. So what we're really saying is that to have success, the entire family is going to have to change, not just the individual. So it's critical to address the family system as a means to help with the person who is struggling with the addictions and the unmanageability. One of the things that the families, then a lot of the parents I work with always come back with me is that, I feel so guilty. I feel responsible. This is my fault. How did I do this? What did I do wrong? And I always try to tell them, you're not responsible for your family members' actions or addiction, but you are responsible for how you respond to it. And then the next question is, well, what's the one thing I can do to help my loved one while they're in treatment? I'm like, get into your own recovery. Start digging into your own stuff, because the biggest way to change the family system is to change the individual behaviors of all the members of the family. So now what we're talking about is some of my favorite stuff. It's codependency. We're talking about a family system that has been struggling with addiction and mental health issues. And I guarantee you it's probably gone back generationally. And so now we know how to dig in there and say, okay, so when we use the word codependency, what are we talking about? And these are some basic ones going on here. We talk about people having low self-esteem. And a lot of times it's really interesting. The family members are like, I don't have that. I'm like, well, then why do you keep giving in? Why do you keep deferring to them? Why do you keep allowing this person who's our tornado to bully you and you buckle under? They're like, oh, I hadn't looked at it that way. I'm like, that's okay. This is where I'm here to help you. People pleasing, poor boundaries, reactivity, caretaking, wanting control, dysfunctional communication, obsessions, dependency, denial, problems with intimacy, painful emotions, and on and on and on. By the way, when we're done, I'm going to give you a link to download my books for free on PDF, and it goes into deeper understandings and explanations of all this stuff. And I don't want to spend a whole ton of time breaking down each one of these things. If you have individual questions when we're done, I'll probably finish up in about 10 or 15 minutes. I'm happy to go over the definitions a little bit deeper, help you grasp and understand. But these are let's just hit like some of the basics. And like rescuing someone who continues to make poor choices is not called love. It's called enabling. I always tell people stop enabling and refuse to be a safety net so they can grow up. One of the things the families I work with always say is, I don't understand. He's 30 years old and he can't do his own laundry or make his own bed. And I'm like, well, why should he? You keep doing it for him. You want to give, necessity is the mother of invention. You want him to learn how to solve his problems. Stop solving them for him. Make him do it himself. But then he won't do it himself. I'm like, well, but that's how he's going to have to learn. He's going to have some consequences of his inaction. People pleasing is a big piece of the family systems like this, and what we're really talking about is not wanting to get into conflict with anyone, not wanting to upset things, not wanting to, to disagree with anybody, because you figure if everybody just gets along, everything's okay. And a lot of this is learned early on as a child. When your parents come and they're angry and they're mad, or maybe one of your parents has had a problem with drugs or alcohol, you learn to be super quiet and hide in the corner and only say yes, and like make sure the house is clean and make sure everything's perfect. That's what it was like in my house. We learned early on that when mom was in a mood, which was almost every day, it was our job to make sure everything was okay and everything was perfect and everything was beautiful. And otherwise there was going to be hell to pay. Passive aggressive is about being conflict avoidant on one side and then also sabotaging the person on the other side. Oops. Huh. Now it's not working. Oh, denial. Here's a good one. Isn't everyone who's a parent somewhat codependent? Yeah, absolutely. I raised 2 stepchildren for 7 years, from ages 3 to 10 and 2 to 9. And yeah, sure, I get it. There's times when you have to be on top of things 24/7. You have to be the parent solving the problem constantly and standing over them because they're not capable of doing it themselves. But so your level of involvement as a parent when they're young is up here. But as they get older, they need to take over. And one of the things, one of my favorite statements for families is, ask yourself, is this something they are capable of doing for themselves? Are they capable of solving this problem themselves? And if they are, then stand back and let them do it. And now, then the next thing that people always say is, well, but they won't. I said, well, I didn't say, will they? I said, are they capable? If they're capable, we want them to start engaging and dealing with it now. Okay, why are we freezing here? So the next question is, oh, this is one of my favorite ones. I'm sorry, something's going wrong with my computer. I'm not being as fluid as I normally would think I'd like to be. The next thing I get from the families is, why do we have to go to meetings? Why do we have to work on our recovery? Why do we have to address our behavior? Here's why. Addiction affects the entire family, not just the addict. The entire family system has to change in order to not repeat the past. We have to change the way we're doing business. The entire company has to change in order to make sure we don't fall back into the same pit, not just the individual. Remember, you're not responsible for your family member's addiction, but you are responsible for how you react to it. And again, you cannot expect the addict in the family to do something that you're not willing to do. That's a big piece. Why do you have to go to meetings? Why do you have to go to therapy? Why do you have to read books about codependency and really dig in and grasp and understand this information? Well, because, you can't expect your loved one to go out and change the way they live, and you're going to stand back and be like, yeah, that's all you. They're a member of the family, and the family needs to change as well to support the entire system. So what's the solution? Well, obviously, I'm a big fan of family case management. It's what my team does. It's what we do. I'm also a huge fan of 12-step meetings. And, they can be Codependence Anonymous. They can be Al-Anon. It can be faith-based. It can be Celebrate Recovery. There's Smart Recovery. There's Craft. There's non-12-step based programs. There's non-faith-based programs. I don't really care. One of my clients just started telling me about one her church does called Regeneration, which looks really fascinating, and she's getting a lot out of it. I would tell you that I am a big fan of people engaging in a community of people fighting the same battle. To me, that's one of the best resources, because you start to realize you're not alone and that you don't have to sit there and completely lose your mind. You can actually engage with people that are willing to love you and help you through the process. I'm a big fan of books. Codependent No More is one of my favorites by Melody Beattie. She's one of the originals. Back in the 80s, she wrote a book about what she saw with the families of the people that were coming into Hazleton in Minnesota. Unspoken Legacy by Claudia Black is phenomenal. It's about families that are struggling with the trauma and addiction. I think it's incredible. Facing Codependence by Pia Melody is one of the other OGs of codependence. She was at the Meadows while Melody Beattie was at Hazleton. And then I'm pretty fond of my books, Chronic Hope, Parenting the Addicted Child. and Chronic Hope, Families in Addiction. The first book I wrote really because the majority of my client base that was walking in the door had someone under 21 that was struggling, and they didn't know how to set the boundaries and hold them accountable. And then when I wrote that, I got a lot of like, hey, this is great, but my person's 30, my person's 40, my person's 60. So I went back and I wrote more in the second book, Families in Addiction. And I that one's really more about how the whole, yes, the first part is still the same about how to use plan A and plan B and how to triage the system, but then it's more in depth about how to work within the structure of the family and then how to bring everybody back together. I'm a huge fan of Pleasure Unwoven. It's a documentary that you can get, I think, on Amazon. You might be able to find it online somewhere as well, by Dr. Kevin McCauley. Phenomenal story. He talks a lot about the medical side of addiction, the spiritual side of addiction, and the recovery side of addiction. He's in recovery himself. Fascinating story. He was a flight surgeon for a Navy fighter squadron in San Diego, and he got caught testing positive for drugs. And he's like, and he's the way he says it is, the Navy has an amazing treatment program. It's called Fort Leavenworth, and he was sentenced to prison for a year. And it's fascinating to hear his story. I also think the Recovery at Home podcast is great. And then I have a podcast and a YouTube channel that I think do a really good job of answering questions. Setting boundaries and holding your family member accountable is actually creating a safe environment for them and for the family. The most important thing is that you're looking at them and saying, we love you, but we're no longer going to participate in this process. But we will offer you a solution. We will offer you help. We will not just throw you out into the cold and be like, good luck. Our position is, if you want help, we'll help you get help. But we're not going to battle you. We're not going to keep doing this. We're not going to keep fighting this and getting the same result. If the addict is a teen, it's critical for both parents to agree on the boundaries, accountability, and the consequences or rewards, especially if it's a split home. If they're divorced, we got to make sure everybody's on the same team, same page. For the addict to change, the entire family has to be willing to change. And again, I know I repeat myself, you're not responsible for your family member's addiction, but you are responsible for how you respond to it. And that's just critical. Codependency is a common concurrent theme in families with addiction. I always say codependency and addiction are like peanut butter and jelly. They just go together, just naturally go together. And it easily becomes an issue for all the family members. And all the family members play different roles. Everybody does some things a little bit differently. Some people are angry, some people are passive, some people are passive aggressive, some people are people pleasing. Everyone kind of falls into a different role, and it's okay. Let's heal that, and let's get everybody into a space where they can start being really open with one another. Some of the other family behaviors that probably get addressed during recovery include keeping secrets, blaming others, ignoring the addiction. I call that ostrich. Normalizing the addiction. Oh, well, everybody goes to jail. Doesn't everybody get arrested? What's the big deal? And then pretending as though nothing has happened. Like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I literally had a family that I worked with where the client was on their third DUI, and they were like 25 years old, or the second DUI. That's why they called me. And then one of the family members said, well, she got a DUI in high school. This is actually her third one. And the mom was like, well, that didn't count. But I'm like, guys, this is how the family layers things. This is how the family keeps secrets. Just because the addict is in treatment doesn't mean everything's all better and everything's fixed. That's just the first step in healing the entire family system. You can't expect your family to succeed after treatment if the family system hasn't changed. Do the work. For an addict to change, the entire family has to change. Intergenerational trauma often leads to codependency and addiction and should be treated by therapists who are experts in this area and treatment programs like APN. Hypervigilance on the part of the family members is a trauma response. So understand that the family has trauma as well, and not just trauma from this situation, but trauma from the past. So it's 5:48 out here in beautiful Florida. I'm going to stop there. I think that's kind of the next piece is about how do we reintegrate the family system, which is pretty straightforward and pretty direct. But I think that part of what the APN asked me to do was go for about 45 to 50 minutes. and that's about where I'm at. And I would love to answer questions and have a dialogue and go back and forth. By the way, I have 2 dogs in here with me, so if you hear a little snorting or anything, and I may grab them and introduce them to you as well. But I'm going to stop the screen share. But you can get my books for free at chronichope.us. There's a banner on top that says click here for the books, and it has all this information.
Amazing, Kevin. Thank you so much for sharing all those things. I think I've been thinking personally a lot about codependency lately, and it's really interesting to hear kind of a more in-depth perspective on it. Have it concentrated too, because some of those books out there, they're amazing, but they are long and heavy to get through. You have to so I appreciate that. Okay, I have a few questions coming in, and for everyone who's just seeing me, I'm Anna. I'm the director of marketing. I'm happy to be here with you. So I'm going to go through a few of the questions, and we can tackle them as you see fit. Okay, so someone says, how do I handle the fear that comes with letting go of enabling and letting someone make their own mistakes, like letting them have to reach their own rock bottom?
Yes, that is a great question. And I touched on it a little bit in the presentation. And here's the thing. I have a reputation of being really blunt and really direct. And so I love that question. And I'm gonna respond back to it with real straightforwardness. How is you being in charge working? You know, if you're talking about someone who's actively in their addiction, who's struggling, whose world is crashing down all around them, is it really working? I mean, that's the thing you have to ask yourself. I know it feels good to you to feel like you're in charge of everything, but is it really working? Are they getting better? Because that's now we're talking about really one of the real dynamics of a family system, right? Is that you have taken on the responsibility of keeping all the trains running on time. And what I love to say is, I'm going to take you out of the addict management business. And nothing personal, but you're not doing a very good job, you know. And I think you're a good person, but the thing is, you can't fix them. You can't solve the problem. How's that?
I think that's great. Yeah, it's interesting as when you're working through codependence, there's so much that comes up as far as like the pressure that you put on yourself to handle everyone else's situation, and then it becomes very easy to be frustrated at the bad job that you're doing. So do you find that can you talk a little bit more about the way that like self-image and self-esteem and codependence go together? I'd love to hear more about that.
Oh yeah, sure. Oh gosh, good questions. Woo, I like it. You know, the thing, when we talk about someone who's taken on that role of keeping the trains running on time and has decided to be in charge of everyone and everything, let me just be clear with someone, you know, I've been, you know, I was raised in this family, and I've been sober 31 years, and I've been going to therapy for about 45 of my years. And so I've learned a lot over the time. And when somebody has that kind of behavior pattern, I mean, my antennas go up, and it's like, oh, okay, you learned this somewhere. I mean, my wife always says, we're going to print t-shirts. And on the front, one of my favorite phrases, it's, I'm going to get a little tough, not tough, but little colorful. And it says, happy families come from happy individuals, or healthy families come from healthy individuals. Healthy individuals work on their shit. Everybody has shit. And on the back, it's going to say, of course, we're going to talk about your childhood, you know, because that's the truth, man, is that we're going to dig in with the individual and really go after them and say, not after them, but go after their experience and be like, oh, okay, so where did you learn to take on the responsibility of everybody else's stuff? And, you know, the thing is, as kids, like when I was a kid, I was rewarded for that. You know, that was something that was expected of me, and it was something that I was rewarded for as a child. And to be totally blunt, I worked in restaurants and stuff, and you know, and I was rewarded for being great putting out fires and solving problems and crisis management. And that's great. But when you get to personal relationships, it's not so great, because people are like, dude, get off my back.
Yeah.
Stop being so controlling.
That's such a good insight, because I think a lot of times codependents, their skills that fail them in relationships, and I'll put myself in this category, our skills that fail us in relationships help us in other places, right? Those are like, they're your high achievers at work. They're people who are like in the community taking care of people. They're like really capable people, but have a lot of like, I think, personal unfulfillment or like dysfunction. I haven't really thought about that.
Oh, so, well, it's always funny because I'm like, well, if we do family archetypes and everything, we're talking about the caretaker, right?
Yeah.
And so who does the caretaker grow up to be? Teachers, nurses, doctors, cops, firemen, therapists.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's great.
And that's just who we are, So, I mean, I always tell my colleagues in the therapy world, I'm like, everyone I know as a therapist struggles a little bit with codependency. And they're like, oh, no, not me. And I'm like, sure.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, super interesting. Okay, I have another question. What can I expect my relationship with a loved one to be like if all we've ever done is enabling and we're just trying to support them now?
That's a great question. And by the way, it belays or shows me, like, what can I expect? Well, I can't answer that question. I don't have a crystal ball. And that's part of that. That's part of that control mechanism of the codependent. It's like, well, what's going to happen? Well, I don't know. What I do know is they're going to stop using and you're going to stop controlling. And we're going to allow the opportunity for things to be totally different and just see how it goes. And, they may do it, they may not. They may be perfect, they may not, but it's not about them. This is really about you. And because here's the other thing I always tell families that blows them their head open. I'm like, look, I want to be really clear. Whether they're sober or not, or whether they're getting help or not, you can still be okay. And they just kind of look at me like, what are you talking about? How is that possible? I'm like, well, I'm not saying it's not going to bug you, but I'm telling you that you can get to that space where it doesn't own you 24/7. Hold on, we have a visitor. This is Bert.
So sweet. Oh my gosh. I love this. I'm very much my dog and phone calls as well.
We have 3 Boston Terriers.
Oh, so sweet.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's super good. I think there's such a difference between loving somebody and feeling responsible for their well-being. And when you feel responsible for their well-being and you're codependent, then if they're not okay, you're not okay. And there is no fixing that until you fix the codependence. And I think, and you're right, it's like, I think codependents try to solve everybody else's problems when really they need to take their focus, and this is so like counterintuitive, take their focus off other people and bring it onto themselves a little bit, right?
Oh yeah, the families that I work with, I said, I can tell that you think I'm speaking like Mandarin Chinese to you. I get it. I understand. Yeah. I mean, you're asking me like, what do I do? And the response I'm giving you is like, fire truck, boiled eggs, and seashells. And you're like, what? Like, you gotta trust me. And then we go back to the question that we had before. How's your way working? Well, it's not. Okay, let's try my way,
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap it up with one last question, which I think is a nice one to end on. And thank you all for tolerating the background noise and sunshine and stuff. So okay, what are some signs to look for that my family system is changing?
Changing?
Yeah. So like we talk about, I think I'll give some context for what I think this person is talking about. We work a lot on healing, right? And I think everybody who's watching this is either helping facilitate other people's healing or working on some healing on their own. So it's easy to think healing looks like this. You said we can't necessarily expect one certain thing to be the marker of our healing, right? But I think signs that the family system is changing. So maybe like how do I know if I'm doing it right is the question.
Well, okay. So wanting to do it right is a very codependent feature.
Oh, wow. Yeah, good point. Okay.
So we're going to back away.
Mm.
But that's great that you brought that up, because what we're going to do, instead of trying to do it right, the most important piece, right, is that everybody start taking care of themselves. And so how are you going to notice things are different in the family structure is that you're going to just notice change altogether. People are going to start saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I hear you, and that sounds great. I'm just not interested, or and it's always funny to watch what happens, right? Well, so like when the family's like, well, where should we go to dinner? And the one person who's kind of the boss is like, we're going to get Chinese food. And the other person's like, yeah, you know what? I don't like Chinese food. Well, you're always a problem. You're always causing problems. You're always disrupting the family system. It's like, no, I just don't want Chinese food, and that's okay. It's okay. One of the things that I had a family that they were so proud of themselves. They all went to the movies, and like they all went to different movies and they had the time of their lives. And like a couple of them saw the same movie, but most of them were like, yeah, I don't want to go to that movie. And they were like, and it was great. Everybody had a good time and they all felt good about themselves and they all had fun together. But there's not this oppressive feeling of, you have to do this, you should do this. And there's not this sort of, what's the terminology? What's the thing I'm looking for? There's not this position of, you have to behave like this. This is the expectation. You got to do this. And it's allowing people to be like, yeah, that's cool. Knock yourself out. That's all right. And great. Love you. And we're all good.
You hit on a couple really interesting points there. I think one is the idea that, like you talked about a little bit earlier, this people pleasing, like the super accommodating can be a symptom, right? And there's something powerful in being able to say, like, I love that you want to do that and I'm going to do this, and we get to do it together and there's like more fulfillment there instead of just like doing everything that someone else wants to do. And then the second thing is, I think it's really interesting to think about that boundaries aren't always going to feel like seamless and comfortable at first, right? That people aren't going to be like, oh, you set a boundary, great job, like, I'm glad you don't want to eat Chinese food with me. There can be a little tension first, but a healthy family system is going to learn how to deal with that tension together until they become proud of the other person for being like, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, one of the things that I did with my family, my mom died in 2014 of long-term prescription drug abuse. The doctor was like, I just nothing I can do. I'm like, yeah, I know. And he was like, really? Because your dad's bawling. I'm like, oh, I love my father, but this is the family system I grew up in. My mom's been this way for 50 years. I love, and here's where I had gotten to. I love my mother. That was her choice. And I had tried approaching her and she wasn't interested. So what I did then was just limit my exposure to that stuff because it was really toxic for me. And it was really hard for me to go sit for hours in a family where my mom was stoned and my dad was angry and there was all this crazy dynamic going on. And I'd just be like, yeah. And I lived in Denver, they lived in Boulder. It was a half-hour drive to get there. Sometimes I'd only stay 15 or 20 minutes. And that seems stupid, but it was like, I love my family and I'm going to spend time with them, but I'm not going to feel obligated. That's the word I was looking for. I'm not going to feel obligated to put myself in a situation where I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. And overall, the discomfort of learning how to do that and be able to make that decision that may frustrate, I'm sure, your parents at sometimes is going to be overall increase your own ability to be okay, and help your personal, like, I'm okay and I can also accept my family as they are and not have to fix them constantly, which I think is great. Well, Kevin, it has been a pleasure and I'm so grateful for the time that you and your pups have spent with us today. this is a topic that I really think that everyone, like codependence, family work, it resonates with everybody to some extent. And as my pastor often likes to say, if it feels like it doesn't resonate with you right now, maybe that's because you need to think about it a little bit more, right?
That's
Yeah,
denial.
yeah, that's right. So, I mean, I think the more tools that we can arm ourselves with to be able to kind of look introspectively at how we are and how we care for other people, and if that really is care for ourselves and for other people, is so important. So yeah, thank you. We will send out that link to the PDF too, to all the people who registered, if that's okay with you.
Oh yeah, I'll have a flyer that I want as many people to get it for free as humanly possible. I want to give the information away for free.
Love that.
Yeah.
Yes, we love that. And that is very much the spirit of the speaker series too. So that goes really well. Yeah. So follow Kevin on YouTube, subscribe to his podcast. We are big fans here at All Points North. And we're just grateful to be able to bring together a community of people that are really looking to grow, to gain their own tools or get more tools to give other people. And we're also grateful for dogs. So yeah, Kevin, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. Thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you next time on the APN Virtual Speaker Series. Bye-bye.